Hello, everybody. This is Joe Harper, and this is Reformed Truther Ministries. We are here for another exciting video today. And the title of this week's video is Sasquatch Footprints Analysis. So I'm excited for this one. We are going to be analyzing the footprint that I found in the woods last week. So this is a bit of a follow-up video. The video I put out last week was really just the raw footage of me finding this footprint, looking at this footprint, discovering it, and saying, wow, what is this? And now that I've had about a week to really just digest it, and I've kind of tried to be objective and play devil's advocate with myself and say, okay, is this really what we think it might be? Or is this maybe me just misidentifying something? I've tried personally to really take a hard look at this. So this here is, you can see this on screen, is the photo that of the Sasquatch footprint that I found. And I do believe that this is most likely a Sasquatch footprint. And so we're going to be looking at this today. We're going to be trying to break this down, and there's going to be a couple things that we're going to look at before, but let's really back up for just a second and let's start at the beginning of this. So as you can, I'm going to share the links to these two videos that I put out, just two different sets of footage, the same footprint that I found. And I found this in the woods of northern Minnesota last week. And as I think about all the possibilities of what this can be, there's really only three potential lines of explanation when you really get into it. One's that a human made it. And there's two subsets of possibilities there. One, a human, you could say, oh, it was a human walking through barefoot, even though it doesn't really look like a human footprint, but we'll just start there. Very unlikely. The woods in the middle of northern Minnesota, it just isn't very likely. Second, it could be some type of a hoax, or if you think that somebody hoaxed a footprint once again in a relatively obscure trail in the middle of northern Minnesota with the hope that somebody could find it, or you could think that I faked it, whatever. Once again, not very likely. And then there's the second potentiality, which is it's an animal footprint. And when you get into animal footprints, there's really only, it's not a deer, obviously. It's not some type of a bird. It's not some type of a small critter like a squirrel or a chipmunk. So there's really only one type of animal that could potentially make a track like that, which would be the Northern American black bear. And that's really what we're going to spend a lot of our time breaking down today. Is this a black bear track? Because the third potential possibility, if it's not an animal track, it is got to be something else, which I think we would have to say it's some type of a cryptid or some type of a creature we can't identify. And if we want to get more specific on that, it would probably be what most people would know as the Sasquatch. So those are really our three lines. A human could have made it, an animal could have made it, or a my book's dropping here, my Meldrum book. Yeah, a human could have made it, an animal could have made it, or it could be something else other than a Sasquatch. And you think of the old line that when all lines of possibility have, all other lines of possibility have been eliminated, whatever is left remaining, no matter how unlikely it may be, must be the truth. So that's really what we're going to come at today. But I want to start today, before we go into the pictures I have a couple pictures of my footprint that we're going to get into. And we're going to talk about things such as the size, the proportions of the toes, how the track left a specific imprint in the mud. Those are all things that we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into that, I want to recognize that it is very possible that Sasquatch footprints could actually be, in some cases, misidentified bear footprints. And Dr. Jeff Meldrum, in his book Legend Meets Science, actually acknowledges this possibility in his book. And I'm going to read a quotation here from this. But he also, and he goes into, he has a whole chapter in his book on this, on how if you don't know tracks well, you could misidentify a bear footprint for a Sasquatch footprint. But he also points to the possibility that skeptics try to eliminate all even credible Sasquatch footprints as bear footprints. So I'm going to read here just a couple sections from this. So his chapter is very humorously titled Grin and Bear It, and then it says Misidentifications. This is chapter 11 of Meldrum's book, Sasquatch Legend Meets Science. So reading from this here, he says, when evaluating eyewitness reports, not only is the credibility of the witness on trial, but also their individual powers of observation and interpretation. Some inexperienced in the outdoors may be quite convinced that any bump in the night or blur of dark fur in the twilight was nothing else than the legendary Sasquatch. What is the likelihood that encounters in the wilds of North America ascribed to Sasquatch could simply be explained away as cases of mistaken identity? The most likely candidate for potential confusion in the northwestern woods of the United States is limited to the American black bear. Although in some regions of the United States and Canada, grizzlies are an additional possibility. The superficial resemblance of a bear standing on its hind legs, the report of an upright Sasquatch, are obvious. The musculoskeletal anatomy of the bear is remarkably human-like. Many a hunter have been struck by the resemblance of a skinned bear carcass to a man. The five-toed paws of a bear also display an uncanny similarity to human feet, save the presence of the claws and the fact that the shortest toe of the bear paw is the inside or medial toe, opposite to the condition of the human foot. We're going to talk about the toes a little bit more in a minute here, but basically what Meldrum is saying is that, hey, if you look at specifically the hind paws, the rear paws of a bear, either a black bear or a grizzly, they can look very human-like. And so if you don't know what you're looking at and you don't analyze it correctly, you could look at a bear paw and say, hey, this is actually a Sasquatch track, when in fact it is not the case. But we're going to see here that Meldrum says there's some things that make a bear footprint distinctly different from other types of footprints. And one of the things that he pointed out is that he said that the little toe, what would be the pinky toe for us, is actually on the inside of their foot. So when we look at our pinky on our hands, it's the same on our little toe on our foot. It's the outside one. So on your left foot, your big toe is on the inside of your foot, and then the little toe is on the outside, and then it's obviously the opposite on the other side of your body. So the bears, their little toe is on the inside of their paws, and their big toe is on the outside. So that's something we want to keep in mind. But I'm going to read another little portion here from Meldrum, and then we'll get into our pictures. So this section I'm going to read next is actually at the end of his chapter. So he goes through the whole chapter talking about differences and all of that. Here we go. So the first part I read was at the beginning of the chapter. This part here is at the end. He says, on the other hand, some authorities have been too quick to suggest that all supposed Sasquatch tracks can simply be attributed to bears. Bruce Marcoux, a research wildlife ecologist in Portland, Oregon, has maintained a web page illustrating this line of reasoning. Although stopping short of being dogmatic on this point, it is, quote, it is my interpretation, unquote. He states that, quote, many tracks of Bigfoot and its global cousins, as reportedly earnestly by honest people, thus excluding the hoaxers, are probably tracks of large wildlife and most likely bears that are simply enlarging their own tracks by sliding, by overstepping, or having their tracks enlarged through weather effects, unquote. After superimposing the unscaled outline of an overlapping brown bear track onto a photo of an alleged Sasquatch track cast, he concludes, in general, the shapes seem to fit rather well, allowing for some minor realignment of the toes. The size of brown bear tracks is larger than those of American black bears. So this little experiment could be redone with more precise measurements of actual casts and tracks. But the shape here seems to fit rather strikingly, unquote. And then Meldrum says, I have shown that indeed one needs to be wary of this hazard of misidentification. In this case, however, the quote, fit, unquote, described by Marceau is actually superficial and quickly falls apart when the aforementioned details such as absolute size, toe proportions, heel shape, claw marks, pads, and so on are carefully examined. Furthermore, a number of the examples depicted by Marceau employ my own photos of alleged Sasquatch footprints from the Blue Mountains, which I examined firsthand with a long line of clear bipedal tracks, as discussed in the introduction. In this instance, there is no question of misidentified bear tracks. Thus, whatever merits remain in Marceau's cautionary note, there is obviously danger in overgeneralizing from an isolated image of a footprint, particularly when specific details are glossed over. So, Meldrum, on the one hand, he's trying to be objective and fair. He says, yes, things can be misidentified as bear tracks, could be misidentified as Sasquatch tracks. But then he also points out there's this other extreme where you could take even credible Sasquatch footprints and you could just explain everything away as a bear track. And he says a couple of things that are going to be helpful for us as we look at these photos. He says, one, that the brown bear track is larger than the black bear. And that's relevant for us with the photos we're going to look at because there are no brown bear tracks in Minnesota because there's no brown bears in Minnesota. There's only black bears. We'll get to that in just a sec. But Meldrum also says, he's saying when you want to look at this stuff, he says you want to look at some of these features such as the toe shape. He talked about the size, how the toes are proportioned, the heel shape, the claw marks, and the pads. These are all things that Meldrum identifies as markers that we can use to try to properly distinguish between a bear track or potentially a Sasquatch track. So that's where we're at this point. So let's back up here. So I have a little presentation here and it's just pictures. And I said Sasquatch footprints or black bear footprints. And then as we move forward, so here is an overhead photo of the Sasquatch footprint that I found once again. And you can see here that it looks as though we have on the right side, it appears to be the big toe here. And on the left side, it appears to be the little toe. And that's going to be something that we're going to want to look at more in a second. That's something that's going to be relevant for our purposes. Now, this one's an interesting photograph because, and I'm really upset with myself that I forgot to bring my tape measure, this was my first hike of the year. And normally I keep a tape measure in my backpack for breaking down a potential footprint, even though the previous times I've gone hiking, this is the first time we've really discovered a footprint. So ironically, in God's providence, I forgot to pack the tape measure, and then that's the time that I happen to find the footprint. So I apologize that some of this can't be a little bit more specific. But in this picture, this is really going to give us some proportion of the size here, because you can see here that my boot print is here on the bottom of the screen, and you can see it pretty clearly. And I wear a men's 10 wide boot, and I measured the length of my boot after getting home, and it is 11.5 inches. And up here, you have this same footprint that we found. It's the same one as this one here, and it's just a different picture of it. And you can see that it's not perfectly lined up, but we'll say that it is of relatively equivalent length. My boot length may be a bit larger. So if my boot is 11.5 inches, let's say that is even let's say one or 1.5 inches larger, 11.5. So this could be potentially 10 inches long, potentially. You know, I'm somewhat generalizing, and I understand that, but you see here that this is a very large footprint, and that's something that is relevant for our purposes. When there's a bear track here. We're going to look at that in a sec. Now, when I showed these pictures first to my dad, who grew up in northern Minnesota, and my dad, he said, look, I'm not a footprint expert. I don't know much about Sasquatch, whatever, but he grew up in northern Minnesota, and he's hunted in northern Minnesota for a lot of his life. And he said, look, I'm not saying this to you just because you're interested in this, not just because you're my son, you know, et cetera, but he said, in his opinion, it didn't look like a black bear footprint, this footprint I found, because he said in his opinion that Sasquatch footprints, not Sasquatch, black bear footprints are usually more rounded in shape. And that's something that's really relevant for our purposes because you see here that this looks to be a bit more narrow and it doesn't seem to have a round footprint. And my dad said in the land that he's hunted on for all of his adult life, that they've actually to his annoyance at times, that state authorities, whatever, sometimes they have to round up black bears and they got to find a place in the wilderness to dump them. Bears wandering into human population areas and all that, and they would actually dump these black bears around the land where they would hunt. And so he's seen a lot of black bear footprints. This is what he told me. He said, just once again, not a footprint expert, he said a lot of times they're more rounded in shape. And when you look at them here, we see here's a good picture of a black bear footprint. Up here, you can see the front one. This would be the front paw, and then this one is the back paw. And you can see that the back paw is larger and it's more rounded in shape. And here you see you got the little foot. On the top one here, so the little foot here is on the inside. So if I'm thinking about this correctly, that would be the front right paw. And then this one I would believe would be the back. Well, it depends on which one. If this one's the little foot, it would be the back left. But you can see here that this is a really good example of a black bear footprint because it is more rounded in shape. So if this track, playing devil's advocate, the one that I found, if this track here was a black bear footprint that got enlarged or smudged in the mud, it would have to be a hind paw. It has to be the rear paw because of the fact that that is the type of paw that is large enough to be mistaken for something more human-like, like a Sasquatch footprint. Here's a good example of the paws. And the other thing I want to point out here is that black bear paws range from 5 to 9 inches. You just look this up. This isn't very hard. There is some spectrum, but it's not hard to look up the size of black bear prints. And if I go back to this picture here, we see that, once again, I said I'm kind of guesstimating, but you can see that this is pretty large. Now, could it have been smudged in the mud like was talked about as a potentiality in the quotation from Meldrum? Yeah, possibly. I think there's something to be said about that, especially if it's smudged, but the toes here are pretty well preserved up on the front. So you're thinking if it slides, is it possible that you could slide and then, still, mud's a funny thing. We need to recognize it. Is it possible that something could have been smudged and enlarged? Yeah, possibly. I mean, even look in the back here. But that being said, it's just still, you can tell here the overhead gives a really good impression of it. You see that it's this was a large foot that made this. There's just no mistaking that. And it's probably larger than the 5 to 9 inches of the black bear. And here we get a really good look at, when you look at you got the print here of the pads, you got their toes, and you can see how the little toe here is on the inside. And then the big toe is on the outside. And, you can see that this bear is lying down here. So this bottom of the two paws, I believe, would be the bottom. That would be his back right paw. And then this one here, the opposite, would be the back left paw of the American black bear. So that gives us some idea of what we're looking at. And if you look up, I looked at a lot of black bear prints. This one's kind of the more typical one. You can get some variation in shape, but typically they're more rounded. But coming to here, I'm going to point out a few things of why I don't believe that this is a American black bear track. Now, people can say, people are going to have to draw their own conclusions, but personally, in my opinion, I think that there's a number of reasons why this track here looks to be something other than a black bear track. First thing I'll point out is it looks like a left foot. And that's going to be important for us because of the fact, if this was going to be a black bear track, it would actually have to be the back right paw, because we can see here that the little toe here is on the left side and the big toe is on the right side of this picture, which I think is pretty obvious. So, yeah, if we're going to play devil's advocate once again, it would have to be the back, the back right black bear paw. But like I said, it looks like a left foot, and it looks like the left foot here starts here with the toe, the big toe up here, and then you have the little toe over here. And if you look at this mud buildup on the right side of the foot, it looks like when you look at how this mud appears to be pressed down, it looks like that was the inside of the foot. And then there seems to be less of that type of an imprint on the other side of the foot. So if you look from the big toe down and you look at the mud buildup just to the right of that big toe, it would look like that was the inside of the foot. Now, when you look at this angle, you pretty much see the same thing. You could say, hey, I want to point out this other one just because I just want to point out the different perspectives. When you look at different pictures in perspective, it can give different impressions. So I just want to show that I'm not trying to cherry pick things by manipulating or just trying to point out one picture in isolation from the greater context. And I'd encourage everybody to go and watch the video. But yeah, so here we have, once again, it looks like the big toe is right here. And it seems to be that if you can see an arch, it appears to be an arch here that would start up here by the big toe. And then that arch, as it were, kind of moves along the toes. Now, the arch starts up by the big toe and it arcs down toward the little toe. And this is very similar to a human foot in the sense that that's what we see on our foot, is that you look at, when you're in your, the privacy of your own home, if you take your sock off and you look at the bottom of your foot, you have that same type of shape of your foot where the arch seems to start, if you see what I mean by an arch. That same shape where it seems to go downward from the big toe toward the little toe. So we see here the big toe on the inside of this foot, on the right side of that foot. We see the mud build up on the right side. We see the arch from the big toe down to the little toe. And then we've also talked about the size. So all of that really seems to indicate to me it's not as rounded as a black bear track. It seems to be larger than a black bear track. Different shape, different size, and it seems that the toes are different than what we would expect. If this is, let's just say, if this is a left foot mark, which we said based on the mud buildup on this side appears to be the inside of it. That's where the pressure seems to have come down. This seems to be the big toe. If this is a left foot, then it's impossible for it to be a black bear track. Because if this was a black bear track, we got the little toe over here, it would have to be the right rear paw, but this appears to be a left foot. So this is just some basic track analysis that would indicate that this is potentially something other than a black bear. Now, once again, if all other possibilities have been eliminated, whatever the remaining conclusion is, however unlikely, that has to be the truth. So obviously, I know for the skeptics, this isn't going to convince everybody. I also understand that this battle isn't over, that this war of trying to prove the existence of this creature, the Sasquatch, is going to go on and on. We try to be objective with this. We've tried to look at this. But when I look at the evidence that I have in front of me, I think there's good reason to suspect that this is something other than a black bear track. And there's no other creature that we know of in the woods of northern Minnesota that makes something this big unless you entertain the possibility of the existence of Sasquatch. And there are many reported sightings in the woods of northern Minnesota for Sasquatch. That's why I'm going up there and hiking to begin with. So all of that being said, there's a lot of reason to really think that that's probably what made this type of a footprint or track. So this was really exciting for me. I kind of felt like Indiana Jones trading out the idol for the bag of sand here when I found this. I felt like this was a good discovery. I feel like this is a good step forward for this ministry. It's a good step forward for this research. And really, my plan is to just keep doing what I'm doing. We're going to follow up with this. We're going to return to that area at some point in the future when the Lord gives me a chance to do so. And we're going to continue to move on with this research and this ministry. We're going to notch this one under our belts, and we're going to move on. So I hope this has been helpful for all of you guys. This has been certainly an exciting one for me to make. And all that being said, this is Joe Harper with Reformed Truther Ministries. God bless everybody. If you have been blessed by the ministry of RTM, then please consider supporting our ministry and check out our website at www.reformedtruther.com.